Hey guys, how's it going? Today I'm going to be solving a SQL interview question asked by Uber, and it's called User's Third Transaction. And this is the first medium level question in this playlist. So hopefully you can follow along with me here, and let me know in the comments how you did. So with that being said, let's get right into the problem. I'm going to read it out loud. So it says, assume you're given the table below on Uber transactions made by users, and write a query to obtain the third transaction of every user. And we want to output the user ID, spend, and transaction date. So over here, it gives us a description of the column names and the types that the types of the data stored in those columns. And so there's 3 columns in this case. And here's an example input. So we have 5 rows, and the output is only returning this row over here. And the reason for that is because this row turns out to be the third transaction that the user made. And so already I can see that we have to look at the user ID column, because we only want to receive the third unique user ID for all of the different people, if that makes sense. So what my plan is going to be here is, I'll just write this down in the comments. So we're first going to have to this is going to involve some window functions, because there's a really helpful function called the row number. And so we're going to use the row number, and we're going to partition by the user ID, and we're also going to order it by the transaction date. And so this is basically called these are window functions, and I'll explain more about that later after I talk about my next steps. So after we create the window function, we're going to store that into a CTE. So store this all in a CTE, and after we do that, we're going to use the CTE and only retrieve the user where the row number is 3. And so let me take a step back here real quick and explain what window functions are, if you don't know what they are. It's basically, think of it as, this is a really quick explanation, but think of it as a group by, but instead of only getting the group and the calculation itself, you can also retrieve other columns in the data. And so it's really useful because the group by it only returns a limited amount of data based on the calculation, but the window function allows you to do the calculation, and it lets you see everything else, whatever else you specify. So then if we put that in a CTE, if you don't know what CTE is, it's basically also known as a common table expression. And so think of it as like a variable. If you have other coding experience, think of it as a variable, and you can call that variable and call all of the columns within that variable. And so it just makes it a lot easier to do more advanced operations and calculations with a CTE. So that was a really quick overview of window functions in CTE, but I'm going to go to solving this question now that we have all of the 3 steps that we need. So the first step that I said was we want to retrieve the row number, and then we're going to say over partition by user ID, and we want to order by the transaction date, because remember, we want to get the third transaction. So it's going to involve we want to make sure that all the transactions are in chronological order. So if I say that, if I just run that, and we got an error, And I spelled partition by wrong. My bad. This query is going to return all the columns, so user ID, spend, and transaction dates. And it's also going to, this window function over here is going to return the row number that it corresponds to. And this partition by, it basically breaks it up into different groups. So in this case, the groups is the user ID. And so whenever we hit a new user, we're going to reset the row number back to 1. And so we're also ordering by the transaction date, which is why all of these transactions are in chronological order. And so you can kind of see where this is going. And I'm just going to change this row number. I'm going to change that to RN as like a shorthand way of expressing it. And let me just move this to a new line to make it easier to see. Okay, yeah, so now it's called RN. And then the next step is to store all this inside a CTE. And so to make a CTE, we just say with, and then the CTE name. So I'll just say, I don't know, what should I call it? I'll say row info. I don't know, that's what I'm gonna call it. You can call it whatever you want, but you could probably name it something more descriptive than mine. But it works for this problem. And so now that if I run everything in this CTE, it's going to give us the exact same thing as before. But now we can call this row info, this CTE, as long as we're doing it all within the same query. So everything has to be before this semicolon over here. And so now that we put it all in the CTE, we're only going to retrieve the rows where the row number is 3, because we only want to get the third transactions that each user makes. So to do that, we have to say we want to select everything, or not everything. We only want to select the user ID, spend, and transaction dates, because I'm just looking at this example here and I'm just seeing what columns are returned. And then we only want to get these columns where the row number is equal to 3. And so if I run that, it's going to get me the user's third transaction. All right, so that should be it for this video. If I click submit, and yep, we got it right. And yeah, I know I went pretty quick in explaining the window function CTEs. So if that's something that you want to know in more detail, then let me know in the comments below and I can make another video on it, because it's really important topic. So yeah, that's all I got for this video. Make sure to check out the other videos you're going to see on the screen somewhere here on the other data lemur questions that I've solved in the past. And hopefully you found this helpful. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks for watching.